on the notes helper. You just have to find it. I think it's B. I'm not going to be going through all of them. I just kind of pick and chose the one I like. This is y equals 2 minus the sine of x plus 3 pi over 2. A few things to think of here is I personally would rewrite this with the plus 2 tacked on the end. That's a little bit more of what I'm used to. And these questions go through and are going to help me do my graphing. Is this graph reflected? It absolutely is, because we have an amplitude of -1 right there, that -1 that's multiplying the sign. But the official amplitude is a +1 because you always take the absolute value. So we will go 1 above and 1 below the midline. The frequency here is the B value. And if you look, the frequency, if there was something other than 1, it would be right here between the sine and the x. And since there's nothing there, we have a frequency of 1, which means we have a period of 2 pi divided by the frequency, so a period of 2 pi. So that's nice. We definitely have a horizontal shift. The plus 3 pi over 2 lets us know we're going to the left 3 pi over 2. And then the vertical shift, the plus 2 at the end, lets us know we're going up 2. All right, so order of operations to make a nice graph here is step 1, start with the midline. So the midline here, it looks like, since the whole thing was moved up 2, that's our new midline, is at y equals 2. All right, and then from there, I'm going to put on the amplitude, the ceiling and the floor. So midline, that's the vertical shift. And then I'm going to do the ceiling and the floor. We're going to get that from the amplitude. It's kind of nice to have an order of how to do things. All right, so from the midline, since the amplitude is just 1, I'm going to go up 1. Maybe I'll go like that, so it looks a little different than the midline, and I'll go down 1 below the amplitude. All right, so I have my ceiling and my floor on. All right, the next thing I'm going to do after that is the horizontal shift. I'm going to put the walls up. All right, so pay close attention. This is where it gets, I think, the hardest for kids, is that we're going to go to the left 3 pi over 2. That's between -1 pi and -2 pi. So you can see here, well, it's really hard to see. This is, if you have the note sheet, this is -0.5 pi, which is like -pi over 2. And then this one is -pi. And then this, if you can see, it says a -1.5 pi, which is really a -3 pi over 2, and -2 pi is over there. Okay, so if we're going to the left 3 pi over 2, that means our wall is right here. That's where we're going to start. But now our period is 2 pi. So it's not going to end all the way at 2 pi. If it had started at 0, it would end at 2 pi. But we shifted. It starts at -3 pi over 2. So it's going to end at a positive pi over 2. Because this added up gets me from here to here is 2 pi. So now I have a really nice box where one cycle of my graph is going to go. Okay, so I look here. Color do I want to use? Here's where I have to really think about, okay, so I did the walls. So the walls would kind of then be the horizontal shift along with the period, because the horizontal shift gets you the wall on the left, and then the period gets you the wall on the right. And then the last step is to do your 5 points. In a sine graph, remember the 5 points, 3 of them are on the midline, And then the other two are on, one is on the ceiling, one is on the floor. Since this one is reflected, I will still have the 3 points on the midline, but instead of going up the roller coaster first, it will go down and then before it goes up. So that's how I'll do the reflection there. So midline on the left wall, midline on the right wall. In the middle, we're going to be at that negative pi over 2. Because I can count 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces to the middle and 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces to the end. All right, and then halfway between the beginning of the middle at negative pi will be, because it's reflected, will be on the floor of the basement. And then from the middle to the other end will be on the ceiling. And then you can connect those. All right. I think then there's definitely room to fill the graph. Let's do it. And you can kind of use the graph to help you. It was every 2 vertical lines, 1, 2, I had a new important point. So if I continue here, if I'm going to count 2 more over and it'll go down, and then 2 more, it's back to the midline, 2 more, it's up to the top. It is not hard to keep these graphs going. If we go here, 2 more, it was up at the top, 2 more, it was at the midline, and I ran out of graph. So you can see a really nice one cycle right through here, but then you can see the beginning of another one and the end of another one over on each side. So pause this if you need more time to make this example look good. We're going to do another one. All right, this is example C. If you've got the notes helper, if not, just copy this down. Y equals 3 times the sine of 2. And then this is kind of hard to read. It's x minus, it's a 3 pi over 4. 3 pi over 4 with a minus 1 tacked on the end. All right, so let's think about this a little bit. Is this one reflected? No, because this number that's multiplying the sign is positive. Does it have an amplitude? It sure does, of 3. So this is going to be stretched out taller and shorter. What's the frequency? Well, that's the number that sits between the sign and the x. So there's a frequency of 2. So to find the period, you do 2 pi divided by the frequency. So since there's a period of pi, that means it's going to be the accordion. It's going to be kind of crunched in a little bit because it will only take pi to do 1 full sine cycle, and between 0 and 2 pi the frequency says we'll fit 2 of them in. A horizontal shift, we're going to the right 3 pi over 4, and a vertical shift, we're going down 1. All right, so if we remember, step 1 is the midline. Get that from the vertical shift. So the midline here, since we moved down 1, it's going to be a horizontal line at y equals -1. Now I'm making it dotted because technically it's not there. It's not a part of the sine or cosine curve, but it sure helps us make a nice graph. Step 2, ceiling and floor. You get that from the amplitude. Since the amplitude is 3, from the midline I'll count up 3. So that gets me a ceiling at y equals 2. And then from the midline, I'll count down 3. That gives me the floor at y equals -4. All right. Step 3, let's kind of divide up the walls a little bit. Let's put up the left wall first. That's going to be the horizontal shift. And then after we put up the left wall, then we'll put up the right wall, which we will get from the period. Yeah, I like this list a little better than my last one. That seems to be a little more helpful. Okay, so the left wall, the horizontal shift, it says it's going to the right 3 pi over 4. If it's hard to read these, I totally get it. This one's pi over 2. Here we're at pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. And that's a little strange to me. I don't see a pi over 3 pi over 4 anywhere, or 3/4 pi, but think about it. This one would be 1 over, would be 1/4 pi. Pi over 2 is the same thing as 2/4 pi. 3/4 pi will fit right in between 1/2 pi and pi. So if we're going to the right 3/4 pi, we're counting over 3 of these vertical dotted lines here to 3/4 pi, halfway between pi over 2 and pi. Okay, so there is my left wall. Then my right wall, the period says it's only pi. This is a short one, okay? So when you look here, if we went over 3/4 pi, then we have to go over 1 3/4 pi. So I ended up counting 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces, which is how this is the scale I have set. All right, then the last thing is to do your 5 points. Make sure to check if you have a reflection. All right, this one we did not have a reflection, and we do remember that a sine graph is our roller coaster. So the first 3 important points all come on the midline. I am going to take a highlighter because it's easy to get confused what box we're working in. It's right here, a ceiling and floor, left and right, walls. All right, so starting there on the left, we start important points on the midline, and we end with an important point on the midline, and then halfway through, we have our 3rd point on the midline. Then between, we're going to go up to the ceiling, and then between the middle and the end, we're going to go down to the floor. Connect them. And this one, it would be very easy to keep going because every vertical dotted line here is a new point on my sine curve. So I'll go up to the ceiling, back to the midline, down to the floor, back to the midline, up to the ceiling, back to the midline, and you can continue this on. And same this way, just going backwards. Down to the floor, back to the midline, up to the ceiling, back to the midline, down to the floor, back to the midline, ceiling, midline. And you could keep this going quite a bit. It's really good practice to go the entire horizontal room you have. You should do it. All right, pause this if you need more time to finish this up. I'm going to go to a 3rd example. All right, y equals -3 times the cosine of 2x plus 1. I like this one. That -3 is multiplying the cosine, so that is going to be your amplitude. And we definitely have a reflection here with an amplitude of 3. Remember, you take the absolute value. The frequency, that's the number between the cosine and the x. The frequency is 2. So when I do 2 pi divided by that frequency and get pi, I know that it's only going to take me from 0 to pi to make 1 cycle through. With a frequency of 2, we can fill 2 full cosine curves in the area we in 0 to 2 pi. There is no horizontal shift. I don't have anything in the parentheses to give me a horizontal shift there, but I do have a shift of up 1. All right, so see how much of this you can do on your own. Listen along, follow me every step of the way, whatever you need at this point. The midline, we shift up 1, so y equals 1. With an amplitude of 3, I go up 3 from the midline and down 3 from the midline to get my ceiling or my roof and my floor. All right, then I'm going to put on the left wall. Since there's no horizontal shift, then you always start on the y-axis. That's how all the problems in the other day's videos were. And with a period of pi, I'm only going to count over pi over 1/4 pi, 2/4 pi, 3/4 pi, 4/4 pi, which is pi. Again, it is very hard to read these. I recognize that, and I'm sorry. This is pi. Here's pi over 2. Here's 3 pi over 2 and 2 pi, if that helps at all. All right, so I've got my box. There's the box. So now I'm ready to do my 5 points. This is a reflected cosine graph. So if we think about a regular cosine graph, it starts and ends up on the ceiling, and in the middle, it goes to the floor. So a reflected one is going to start on the floor and end on the floor, and in the middle, it'll be up in the ceiling, like that. Oops, ending there. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. In the bottom left-hand corner of the box and in bottom right-hand corner of the box, it will have points. Up on the ceiling in the very middle. And then between the beginning and the middle, we'll hit the midline. And between the middle and the end, we'll hit the midline. Just like that. And this one will not be hard. So this will not be hard to continue because it was every vertical line I had a new point. So I'm going to go up to the midline, up to the ceiling, down to the midline, down to the floor, back up to the midline again, and that's the room I've got. There, and then I could keep going here for quite a while. Midline, ceiling, midline, floor. Midline, ceiling, midline, floor, back up to midline. All right, and one thing that I haven't been doing that I think would be worth it is remind yourself of where you started. It was a reflection, so we started down at the bottom there. In this example, it was a sine graph. There was no reflection, so the start was right here. Working backwards a little bit. This one was a sine graph that was reflected. It started way over here. If there is no horizontal shift, it starts on the y-axis, but these horizontal shifts make for some goofy starting spots. I've got one more and then I'm done. This is the last example. There's a lot going on here, but I think you're ready for it. All right, do we have a reflection here? No. There's no negative out front with the amplitude or the stretch. The amplitude is 2. And then the frequency, oh, this accordion is going to be scrutched in really tight with the frequency of 4. We're going to have 4 sine curves squished into 2 pi. Then the period, 2 pi divided by the frequency, means every 1/2 pi we're going to have to fit a sine graph. That's going to be really tight. There is a horizontal shift to the left pi and a vertical shift of down 3. I do think of all of this, the horizontal shift is the most difficult, so be careful and take your time. First things first, start with the midline. We're going to go down 3 and put the amplitude, the ceiling, up 2 from the midline and then down 2 from the midline. All right, ceiling and floor is done. Now let's put the left wall on. If we're going to go to the left pi, well, it's hard for you guys to see, but here's pi over 2, or negative pi over 2. Here would be negative pi. So that's how far we're going to the left. And then let's figure this out. Let's take this nice and slow. Normally, let's think of, we have to fit 4 sine cycles into 2 pi. Well, 2 pi, if it starts at negative pi, it would end at positive pi. So I've got to divide this into 4 groups because 4 cycles have to fit. From left to right, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it looks like every 2, every 1/2 pi, we have to put in another wall. So look at that. In 2 pi, we're going to fit in 4 cycles. 1, 2, 3, 4, which fits because the frequency is 4. Okay? So when you look at this, the one we actually really are going to focus on is that first one, that little box right there. Ceiling, floor, wall, and wall. And let's think about it. It's a sine curve. So those sine curves are roller coasters. So here I need the beginning and the end on the midline. And the middle is also on the midline. So when I go up to the ceiling, I'm halfway between. And then down to the floor, I'm halfway between. And I've created my first sine graph. Should be really easy to make another because the truth is every vertical line on you get a point on the midline, and then we're going to go up and down to create that second sine curve. Up to the ceiling, down to the floor. up to the ceiling, down to the floor. And there is 4. And the truth is, without too much trouble, you could keep going all the way till you run out of graph. Up to the ceiling, down to the floor, up to the ceiling, down to the floor. Oops, that should be like that. And you could go this way. Down to the floor, up to the ceiling, down to the floor, up to the ceiling, down to the floor. There you go. I think it would be good to mark. Where did we start? We started right there. All right, that's all I have for chapter 7 videos. I hope you took some good notes. Get them organized. Thank you so much for sticking with me.